2 a.m., I woke to an alert. Someone was in my backyard. I opened the camera feed just in time to watch the HOA president Diane twist open the valve on my rainwater tank. In the glow of the night vision, her movements were smooth,
Diane,
deliberate, like she
what have you
owned the
done?
place. My heart raced, but I didn't run outside. Instead, I watched, knowing that what I'd seen wasn't just theft, it was something bigger. This wasn't just about a few stolen gallons of water. It was about power. And Diane had made a big mistake. What I'd do next? Well, it wasn't about confronting her, it was about gathering the evidence to make her wish she'd never messed with me. Would you confront her, or let the evidence do the talking? Diane wasn't like the other HOA presidents I'd heard about. She wasn't just about rules and regulations. She was different. She had a way of twisting everything to fit her agenda, and I could see it from the moment we moved in. The garbage cans, a few minutes late, a violation. The hedge, an inch too tall, a fine. But it wasn't until she caught wind of my rainwater tank that things really escalated. She had this look in her eyes every time she talked about it, like it wasn't just about the tank, it was about control. Her criticism started with the usual HOA stuff. It's unsightly, it's against the aesthetic standards, but I could tell there was something deeper. She didn't just want to enforce rules. Diane wanted to make sure everyone knew she was in charge. It didn't take long for her to start finding problems where there were none, sending her minions to inspect my yard, questioning the system's legality. The thing about Diane, she was smart. She knew how to play the game, how to make people bend. But when I caught her on camera that night, I realized something. Diane wasn't just playing HOA president, she was playing me. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The HOA's first complaint arrived just a week after I'd finished installing the rainwater system. It was a classic move, violation of aesthetic standards for my water tank. Diane made it sound like I had a toxic waste site in my backyard. The form was official, neat, the kind of thing that made you feel like a child caught in the act. I wasn't worried at first. It's just paperwork, I told myself. But then, the inspection started. They sent out Steve, the HOA vice president, to inspect the tank. He showed up, clipboard in hand, staring at my system like he was some kind of inspector, but it was clear from the start he was just a puppet. Diane's fingerprints were all over this. She had already told him what to look for, already decided I was guilty. Rachel, who's always calm and methodical, rolled her eyes as Steve wandered around taking notes. "It's just a warning," she said. But I could feel it, this was the beginning of something bigger. Diane was drawing lines in the sand, and I was in her sights. By the time Steve left, there was already another notice on my door. Second violation, aesthetic compliance. I knew then that this wasn't about a tank. This was about her controlling everything, even the things she had no right to touch. The next violation came less than a week later. This time, Diane didn't send Steve. She came herself. She marched right up my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, eyes, scanning my yard like she was inspecting a crime scene. The rainwater system. Of course, she had something to say about it. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she was looking for a reason to find me. "You're not allowed to have these kind of systems here," she said, a smug little smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. "It's a violation of HOA rules. It disrupts the neighborhood's uniform aesthetic." I felt my blood pressure rise. Disrupts the neighborhood. My tank wasn't an eyesore. It was neatly installed, tucked away in the corner of the yard. I knew exactly what was going on. Diane wanted control, and she wasn't going to let something as simple as a rainwater system stand in her way. I tried to keep my cool. "I'm within my rights," I said, handing her the spec sheets, the permits, everything she could possibly need to see that my system was legal. But she barely glanced at them. "We'll see about that," she muttered, snapping the clipboard shut. As soon as she left, Rachel and I shared a look. This wasn't just about the tank anymore. It was about power. And Diane wasn't going to back down until she had all of it. I should have known things were going too smoothly when we didn't hear back from the HOA for a few days. But when I stepped into the yard on a Saturday morning, I instantly smelled something off. The grass around the base of my rainwater tank was completely dead. And not just from drought. No, this was intentional. The edges were too sharp, the dead patches too clean. I bent down inspecting the soil. Herbicide. I could smell it on the dirt, unmistakable. My first instinct was to check the camera feed, but before I could even reach for my phone, I saw the telltale sign, a trail of dead grass leading from the edge of my property. Someone had used my tank's location as a personal dumping ground for chemicals. Rachel came over and immediately pulled out a soil sample kit. "Herbicide," she said, almost sounding bored, like this was another step in our investigation. She tagged the sample, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just an isolated act. Diane had crossed a line. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was sabotage. And sure enough, when we checked the water levels in the tank, we saw something else. The numbers were off again. The dips that had been happening for weeks right on schedule. Someone was taking water. And it wasn't just an accident anymore. This was all part of Diane's plan. By the time I received the notice, I was already bracing myself. The HOA had officially scheduled an emergency inspection of my rainwater system, citing safety hazards and unsanctioned plumbing. Diane was coming for me this time with legal backing. I wasn't sure what they thought they could find. We had all the documentation, but I knew this wasn't just about regulations anymore. Steve showed up again, clipboard in hand. This time, he had a professional-looking attorney with him, someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Diane wasn't wasting time anymore. She had come prepared to shut me down. I kept calm. Rachel and I handed over the specifications, pointing out every bit of compliance. But Diane wasn't listening. She was looking for anything to prove I was in violation. She claimed my system was a fire hazard because of the pipes near my tank. It was ludicrous. But she had her rules and was determined to make them stick. When they left, they didn't have a fine to issue, but the message was clear. Diane wasn't stopping. She was preparing for a fight, and it was only going to escalate from here. That night, I checked the cameras again. I didn't expect much, just another routine check, but this time, the camera pinged an alert. Someone was tampering with my system. I ran outside, and sure enough, the valves on my rainwater system had been broken. Water was spilling across the yard, seeping into the ground like a slow-moving flood. I rushed to the control panel, my heart racing as I inspected the damage. And that's when I saw it, a small piece of fabric caught on the broken valve. It was navy with a silver pinstripe. I recognized it immediately. Steve had worn that exact jacket at the HOA meeting. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just vandalism. This was sabotage, and it was personal. Diane was involved, but now Steve was too. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but it wasn't just rage anymore. It was calculated. Rachel stood by my side, her eyes narrowed as she surveyed the damage. "We're not just going to let this go," she said quietly. I didn't need to say anything. We both knew what had to happen next. We were done playing by the rules. This time we were going to gather everything we needed to bring Diane down for good. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I knew it was my moment to take control. Diane had been smug, confident, and relentless in her attacks. But this time, it would be different. We were prepared, and I wasn't going to let her walk all over us again. The room buzzed as neighbors trickled in their murmurs, a soft backdrop to the tension that hung in the air. Diane arrived early, standing by the front of the room with her clipboard, her face flushed with self-importance. She gave me one of her usual glares, but I barely acknowledged it. When the meeting started, Diane wasted no time. "This rainwater system is illegal, a clear violation of our HOA standards," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "We can't allow one person to break the rules without consequences. It's a public safety issue." I stood up, my heart steady. The room quieted as I clicked through the presentation on my tablet, the footage from the camera, the night Diane tampered with my system, filling the screen. "Actually, Diane," I said, my voice cool, "you're wrong." The video played her face sharp and clear as she twisted the valve open in the dead of night. The room froze. Diane's mouth opened, but no words came out. She tried to speak, but I'd already won the first round. I didn't stop there. I clicked to the next screen. The data we'd collected was irrefutable. The dips in my water usage, they perfectly matched Diane's landscaping schedule. Her flower beds bloomed right after my tank levels dropped. It was precise. I pointed it out one chart after another. "These are the numbers, Diane, and they don't lie." The room was dead silent. People shifted uneasily in their chairs. Diane's calculated confidence cracked. She started to shift uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at Steve, but he didn't meet her gaze. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled up the photo Rachel had taken, a blacklight shot of Diane's pool plumbing glowing with our fluorescent tracer. The blue light flickered on the screen, unmistakable evidence that Diane had been siphoning water directly from my rainwater tank. The gasps in the room were audible. Diane's face flushed red as the reality of the situation hit her. She tried to speak again, but it was too late. This wasn't just about breaking HOA rules anymore. This was theft, and everyone in that room knew it. Diane was done. She stood up, flustered, her composure completely shattered. "This is all a lie, a setup. You can't just accuse me of stealing." "Actually," I interrupted, "we have more than just video footage. We have proof. You've been stealing water from my system for months. And if that wasn't enough, I think it's time you explain the UV footage of your pool. Why don't you tell everyone how that works?" The room turned from sympathetic to judgmental. People who had previously avoided the drama, neighbors who had stayed neutral, were now whispering amongst themselves. Diane had crossed a line. This wasn't just an HOA dispute. This was criminal. Steve, standing beside her, shifted awkwardly. His face was ashen, and when I looked at him, I saw the guilt, the hesitation. I'd seen it before in people who knew they were caught but couldn't back down yet. Isn't it a bit strange, Diane, I continued, that your water usage is half of the neighborhood's average? For a property with an Olympic-sized pool, Diane's face paled. She tried to stammer a response, but the words didn't come. Chief Foster, who had been quietly observing from the back, finally spoke. Filling pools is illegal under emergency water restrictions, and stealing water from your neighbor is a crime. The finality of his words was like a judge's gavel. Diane's arrogance collapsed, and for the first time, she seemed small, powerless. I'll be opening a formal investigation, Chief Foster continued. There will be charges for resource theft and vandalism. It was done. Diane was finished. The room erupted into quiet murmurs, but all I could feel was a strange sense of peace. Finally, justice. The next few days were a blur. Diane's removal as HOA president was swift and nearly without protest. Once the community heard the truth, the floodgates opened. People who had kept their heads down during the previous HOA meetings, those who didn't want to get involved, were suddenly speaking up. The neighborhood that had once felt fractured, divided by petty rules and restrictions, started to feel like a real community again. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the changes. People came by the house to thank us, shaking my hand, offering to help with whatever came next. Olivia, our neighbor with the rose garden, was the first to stop by with a tray of fresh cookies. I don't think I've ever seen Diane so flustered, she laughed, sitting with Rachel and me on the porch. And I've never seen this neighborhood come together like it has. You've got a lot of people behind you now. Rachel gave a small, satisfied smile as she took a sip of her coffee. It was never just about the rainwater system. It was about what Diane was trying to do to everyone. She thought she could control us, but we were always stronger than she gave us credit for. And she was right. The system wasn't just a water supply anymore. It was a symbol of how much we were willing to stand up for what was right. It had become the cornerstone of a shift in our neighborhood, a shift I wasn't sure I'd see when we first moved in. The changes didn't stop with just a few neighbors showing their gratitude. There was a quiet but noticeable shift in the way people interacted at the next HOA meeting. For the first time, the agenda wasn't full of meaningless rules or nitpicking regulations. The topics were constructive, talking about things that actually benefited the community, like organizing neighborhood cleanup days and creating a drought-resistant garden initiative. People were finally beginning to see the bigger picture, community first, control last. The legal fallout came quickly after Diane's removal. The city, once slow to act, moved swiftly now that the evidence was overwhelming. Diane was charged with theft of resources, vandalism, and property damage to my rainwater system. The fines were steep, over $7, 0 inches restitution, and the city began investigating her role in manipulating HOA records, including her deliberate omission of the emergency water system from official documentation. But it didn't stop there. The real estate board took swift action against her. Her license was suspended for 6 months due to her involvement in fraud. I didn't feel any satisfaction in that. It wasn't about punishing her anymore. It was about making sure that this kind of abuse of power never happened again. The neighborhood slowly started to rebuild its trust in the HOA. Steve, who had stood by Diane, was removed from the board as well, though his punishment was less severe. He cooperated with the investigation, and eventually he admitted that he had been manipulated into supporting Diane's actions, though that didn't excuse his lack of integrity. The city also moved to protect rainwater collection systems like mine going forward. They added an official line item in the city budget to fund and maintain decentralized water systems in neighborhoods with limited access to water. What had once been a niche project was now being recognized as an essential part of urban resilience, especially in the face of climate change and water shortages. But the best part, the community started to come together in a way I'd never expected. We weren't just fighting to keep our property rights intact, we were building something stronger. Emily, the environmental attorney who had helped us throughout the legal process, was elected as the interim HOA president. She was a breath of fresh air, bringing a pragmatic, community-first approach that was sorely needed. The new HOA board quickly moved to dismantle Diane's outdated rules and instead created new standards that were sensible, that prioritized sustainability and community well-being. The board set up workshops on drought-tolerant landscaping, proper waste disposal, and even emergency preparedness for future water shortages. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other before were now volunteering for these initiatives, and those who had once avoided HOA meetings now showed up asking questions, getting involved, eager to help. Rachel and I walked around the neighborhood a week later, the house still buzzing with energy. The tank once, a symbol of tension, now stood as a quiet reminder of everything we'd overcome. We planted native grasses around it, added a small path leading to a plaque the city had created to honor Frank's contribution. It felt like a tribute not just to him, but to the whole neighborhood, to the resilience of the community we had fought so hard to protect. As the days turned into weeks, we hosted a cookout, inviting the neighbors to the backyard where everything had started. The lights twinkled along the fence, casting a warm glow over the yard as we all gathered around. I raised my glass to Frank, who had joined us via video call, and then to the community that had stood by us. Sometimes I said, looking around at everyone, the loudest person in the room is the one most afraid of losing control. And sometimes the thing they try hardest to destroy is the thing they depend on without even knowing it. The crowd chuckled, and a few of the neighbors raised their glasses in agreement. Diane's reign was over, but more importantly, the neighborhood was finally ours again. As I looked at the rainwater system one last time now, with fresh grass growing around it, I felt a peace settle over me. We had weathered the storm, not through brute force, but through careful, calculated action. And in the end, that's what truly made the difference.